Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masa Popovac, and I'm always so impressed whenever someone tries to say my name. It's very exciting for me because I've heard all these different variations. So today I'll be talking to you about my research. This is my PhD research, or one part of my PhD research, which I completed last year, looking at online and offline experiences of aggression and bullying. And it was a study that I did comparing adolescents in the UK and South Africa. So I grew up in South Africa, and I moved to the UK to do my PhD. And I did this because in South Africa, there was very little research at the time looking at experiences of aggression and bullying. And so I was interested in how children's or adolescents' experiences compare from a developing country context to a developed country context. So that's what I'll be talking about today. So I was primarily interested in online experiences, and I looked at cyber-aggression and cyberbullying, where cyberbullying is a broader term encompassing a range of different aggressive acts, including cyberbullying, harassment, and stalking. So all forms of cyberbullying are also forms of cyber-aggression, but not all forms of cyber-aggression are forms of cyberbullying. And this is because cyberbullying is repeated, intentional, and there's a power imbalance between the victim and the perpetrator, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with. So these are some of the examples of the behaviors that I looked at, and this is research that really kind of informed my research. So I was interested in experiences of bothering someone online, teasing in a mean way, calling someone hurtful names, intentionally leaving someone out of something, threatening someone, and saying unwanted sexually related things to someone. And these experiences happen through any form of information and communication technologies, including text messages, pictures or video clips via mobile phone cameras, emails, phone calls, emails, chat rooms, instant messages, websites and blogs, social networking sites, and internet gaming. So the literature shows that the prevalence rates vary across studies or across countries, but a meta-analysis showed a prevalence rate of between 20 and 40%. So clearly this is quite a serious issue. These experiences have also been linked to a range of negative effects, such as suicide attempts, eating disorders, depression, sadness, hopelessness, anxiety, fear, anger, frustration, lower self-esteem, substance abuse, inability to concentrate, and poor grades, school dropout and absenteeism, and low school commitment. So it's got links to internalizing problems, externalizing problems, and also has links to negative educational outcomes and a poor school social climate. And these similar effects have also been found for face-to-face experiences, so a lot of similarity in terms of the implications. So I was interested in the prevalence and the impact of these experiences among adolescents, both online and offline. And as I mentioned earlier, there's very little research in developing countries. So I found very little research in South Africa or Africa in general or any other developing countries. So this is a major gap at the moment. And so I was interested in how experiences compare across these different contexts. So I'll talk about two studies today. The first one looks primarily at online experiences. So I asked adolescents to report on online experiences they had ever had, and they were aged between 12 and 18 years, and you can see the number of participants in each of the countries. So this data was collected through questionnaires at schools. And then the second study was looking at both online and offline experiences of aggression and bullying, but asked about the past 12 months, so it was a shorter time frame. And again, they were aged 12 to 18 years, and you can see the number of participants in each country for that part of the research. So the idea was to first find out what are adolescents' online experiences in these two countries to get a general idea, and then to kind of look at it in more detail to see where the problem fits in more broadly and in terms of its link to offline experiences as well. So for study one, which looked at cyber-aggression and cyberbullying ever, you can see that most adolescents in both countries had had at least one experience of cyber-aggression, which was significantly higher in South Africa. And of these, you can see the proportion who had been cyberbullied. So this was about 34% in South Africa and 43% in the UK. So these rates are towards the high end of the rates found in that meta-analysis. So clearly this is an issue in both of the countries under investigation. So to give you an idea of some of the types of behaviors engaged in, so this is cyber victimization, and you can see the proportion of adolescents who had ever engaged in any of these behaviors. So being called a hurtful name or receiving a hurtful or rude comment, message, or email was most frequently reported. And many of the other experiences were fairly similar between the two countries. So for example, having rumors or gossip spread online, being threatened online. But there was one behavior that kind of stood out as sort of a major difference between the countries, and that was that adolescents in the UK were twice as likely to have had a picture posted online to embarrass them. So with the focus groups that I initially conducted, I found that adolescents in the UK often spoke about when it's their birthday, it's a sort of normal experience to have an embarrassing picture posted of you online. And so this is not really something that happens in South Africa, or at least wasn't reported in the focus groups. But the adolescents in the UK said that this was supposed to be quite funny, but a lot of them felt very anxious around their birthday because if this was something that was happening in their peer groups. So I think that might account for that significant difference there. So the same behaviors in relation to perpetration, and you can see some of those experiences. Adolescents were most likely to admit calling someone a hurtful name, and then quite low on some of the other behaviors. Then I was interested to look at the role of cyber aggression, so whether individuals were both a victim and a perpetrator, a victim only, a perpetrator only, or if they had no experiences. And you can see that in both countries, adolescents were most likely to have been both a victim and a perpetrator. So clearly there's some links here between victimization and perpetration, which has been found in other studies. Females in South Africa were significantly more likely to have experienced cyber aggression and cyberbullying, whereas there were no gender differences in the UK. But in both countries, these experiences increased with age, peaking at middle adolescence, so around 14 to 15 years. I asked adolescents to tell me what someone their age was most likely to be cyberbullied about. And you can see the 4 categories of responses there, and they are listed in terms of the frequency with which they are reported. So the most important one is appearance. So adolescents said that they were most likely to be cyberbullied about the way they looked, their weight or their body shape, their height, or the way they dress. The second category was the nature of their online expressions and the posts and pictures that they put up online. So what they post, what they share, embarrassing photos, the way they pose when taking photos, some of the effects and edits that they use, so filters or using too many filters or posting too many selfies. The third one was around sexuality and sexual orientation. So it had to do with sexual activity or experience, so having too much or too little, actual or perceived. Being gay was one of the quotes that were listed here, so LGBTQ youth. And again, actual or perceived, and then also their relationship status or who they were dating. And then there were other markers of their identity, such as race, religion, gender, the financial status of their family, or what they said it was intelligence, so being too smart or having the lowest scores in the class. So these experiences were linked to a range of emotional effects, and you can see that these were quite similar between the two countries. So at the top you can see the proportion who had been hurt or made to feel sad about something that was said or done to them online, those who had been scared or worried about something that was said or done to them online, and about 25% did not want to go to school on some days because of something that was said or done to them online. Those who had been cyberbullied were also asked to give an account of how they felt when they had this experience, and there were 4 key themes that emerged. Firstly, sadness and depression. So I was crying every day because of what they said, and they were in my class. Low self-esteem. It made me feel bad about myself and worthless. Rejection and isolation. It makes you feel hopeless and alone, and thoughts of suicide and self-harm behaviors. I felt like cutting myself, lying in the middle of the road and dying. So clearly this is a very serious issue in both countries and has serious implications for mental health and well-being. So the key findings for this part of the research was that cyber aggression and cyberbullying rates are very high in both of these countries, with serious emotional effects reported. So this is an important issue, and it's important to intervene early. There were links between online victimization and perpetration, so we need to intervene at multiple roles, not just from the perspective of victims. So for most of us sitting here who are working in this area, that seems fairly obvious. But in South Africa, this is not really well understood, and most of the time it's just responding to incidents of cyberbullying. And there was also a peak at middle adolescence, so perhaps this needs to be a particular focus for intervention efforts. I'm not saying that we shouldn't address it at younger ages, we should, but in a country like South Africa where resources are limited and we have to do something quickly, perhaps this needs to be an initial first step before we kind of address these issues on a broader scale. So the second part of the study looks at online and offline aggression and bullying in the past 12 months. And you can see, first of all, experiences of aggression, both online and offline, and again, significantly higher in South Africa. But the bullying experiences were fairly similar. So about a quarter of adolescents in each country had experienced cyberbullying, and about 42% in South Africa and 39% in the UK had experienced face-to-face bullying. And these are rates in the past 12 months, so this is very high. The orange bar shows the perpetration rates. So you can see that in South Africa, adolescents were significantly more likely to admit perpetration. But when I asked, have you ever bullied someone, virtually no participants admitted that they did. So we're talking rates of about 1.7 and 0.6%. So it's possibly not the case that they're not bullying, but it's more a case of not admitting to it. So these are some of the offline victimization experiences. So again, adolescents were most likely to have been called a hurtful name or been made fun of or teased in a mean way face to face. This was just over half that had experienced this in the past 12 months. Then you can see that about a half had been left out of things on purpose or been excluded from a group or ignored on purpose. Then those who had been lied about or had someone spread rumors or gossip about them, had been threatened to be hurt in any way, had their belongings damaged or had something taken away. And at the bottom, 27% in each country had been physically victimized by being hit, kicked, punched, slapped, or pushed. And then exactly the same behaviors, but in terms of perpetration. So you can again see some of the interesting differences between the two countries. So overall, I looked at what bullying experiences adolescents had in the past 12 months, and I found that when I looked at these experiences overall, that nearly half of adolescents in each country had experienced some form of bullying in the past year, which was either face-to-face or online. So that's a pretty big deal, considering that's about 1 in 2 adolescents. So of these experiences, similar patterns were found in each of the countries. So the most common bullying experience was face-to-face. So 47% had experienced offline bullying only. 35% in the UK and 40% in South Africa experienced both online and offline bullying in the past year. And 17% in the UK and 11% in South Africa experienced cyberbullying only. So this shows that face-to-face bullying is still the main form of bullying, that there are clear links between these behaviors, and that these behaviors also occur in isolation in the online context as well. So this pattern was also found in other studies, but it's very interesting for me to note that South Africa fits into this pattern as well. So there are links between online and offline aggression and bullying, and this is applicable in developing contexts as well. And also what was particularly interesting for me was that the adolescents had very similar experiences on the types of behaviors that they experienced. And this is despite differences in technological infrastructure between the two countries, as is the case with the online context, but also differences in the social structure as well. So one of the biggest differences, so these experiences are fairly similar, but one of the biggest differences is the importance that's placed on these issues in these two countries. So in South Africa, this is not really a priority issue. And you can see this is a focus group interview I had with some teachers, and the quote by a teacher in South Africa here says, "Cyberbullying is a problem in affluent schools. Our social problems with our students are way bigger than this. We're concerned with drug use, physical violence, and weapons being brought to school and teenage pregnancy, not this." So this is very this is also a reason why it was so difficult for me to actually recruit schools to be a part of this research, because these schools would much rather give their time and effort to participate in studies that looked at some of these issues which they thought were more important. But considering the link between online and offline aggression and bullying, these things do feed into things like physical violence, and they do have an impact on the school social climate. So it's important to change some of these ideas to have an impact in these contexts as well, because clearly this is just as much of an issue in South Africa as it is in the UK. So the implications of this are that children in developing contexts may be more vulnerable due to technology developing faster than the knowledge policy and laws to address them. So there's been a rapid surge in the use of technology in South Africa, so not all of the children will have access to iPads, or they won't have a computer at home that allows them to go online. But they do have mobile phones, and mobile phones are getting cheaper, the data bundles are getting cheaper, there's Wi-Fi that's more accessible, so they are accessing the internet. So there's been a rapid surge in technology use, but the knowledge of these issues and the policies and laws have not extended to the same pace as the technology. So there's lower importance placed on this issue in relation to other social problems faced, and also still very little research to extend knowledge and strategies in developing contexts. The other thing is the importance of online aggression and bullying forming part of broader anti-bullying strategies aimed at creating a positive school social climate. And so again, this is very obvious because there's been amazing talks at this conference that look at some of the interventions that have been implemented around the world, which have been very, very effective. But the question now is, how do we implement these on a larger scale, especially in developing contexts where very little work is currently being undertaken to address some of these issues. So what we need to do is develop interventions that look at the individual level, so focusing on the children and adolescents who are having these experiences, but then to also extend these interventions to include some of the broader environments like the school, the home, creating connections or more collaboration between the school and the home, engaging external support services and networks, and also at the macro level having an impact in terms of policies and laws and educational media campaigns. So we do need a multi-tiered approach, which is working in other countries, but we need to also include this in developing contexts as well. So the way forward, in my mind, is that we need a whole school approach to online safety, which has been very successful in other countries. So because this was my PhD research, I was kind of, once I had all these results, I was at a crossroads in terms of being an early career researcher and what am I going to do and where am I going to go with this research. And so I was really inspired by these findings in terms of actually doing something practically. So I designed and piloted an intervention in South Africa with some of the schools and had some positive initial results. So my goal now is to test out these interventions on a larger scale in the UK and South Africa. So currently looking for funding to be able to do that, but it's very exciting for me to be involved on a practical level. And then in terms of further research, we need to move beyond just looking at prevalence rates. So first, of course, this is important to gain an understanding of how big these issues are, but to then go more deeply into them to understand the complexity of the links between these experiences that occur online and offline, and also to focus on coping and resilience, because if we understand that better, we can feed that into some of the interventions, and not just in terms of intervening on the issues, but also prevention at younger age groups as well. So thank you very much, and I also have data in terms of parents' perceptions of some of these issues, which I'll be presenting in the roundtable in the next session. So if you are interested in that, you can come and find me there. Thank you very much.